Welcome to this talk on PE and sport in girls' public schools, 1850 to 1914. Mid-Victorian sport was predominantly a male phenomenon. Women's involvement was modest and restricted, but growing. That growth, however, aroused male anxiety, fear, and hostility. Would sporty women undermine male superiority and render men effeminate? Men stressed women's medical vulnerability, emotional weakness, reproductive risks, and physical limits. Arguments that persisted until the 1960s. Only at the Rome Olympic Games would women be allowed to run beyond 400 meters. Girls from upper and middle class homes were expected to limit their exercise to walking arm in arm with other girls, and in a crocodile supervised by a governess. She might have tested them on their French verbs as they progressed. Gradually, however, women's right to use their bodies as they wished overcame male resistance. Women from the higher social classes might now participate in hunting, archery, golf, and croquet, but on a social rather than competitive basis. Efforts to participate made quicker progress in schools. The few schools for girls that existed before 1850 deliberately neglected academic subjects and physical exercise in favour of stylish accomplishments. By the 1860s, however, many middle-class parents wanted to do better by their daughters. They were supported by the findings of the Taunton Commission. In a side effect of the examination of grammar schools for boys, the commissioners were highly critical of girls' education. The result was that new day high schools for girls were founded to provide a rigorous academic education, beginning in London and then extending to most major cities. The first was North London Collegiate School, founded by Frances Mary Buss. The term collegiate was used to distinguish the schooling from that provided by home-based governesses. The first girls' boarding school, Cheltenham Ladies' College, followed quickly. Dorothea Beale became its principal. The problem of physical education was a concern for both headmistresses, but the rough sports of the boys would not do. Physical exercise in these schools did progress beyond walking, but not by much. Calisthenics were introduced to develop the beauty of the figure and to promote a graceful carriage. Rhythmical movements involving hoops and wands, often directed by a French professeur or an Italian professore, were accompanied by the piano. A select few women were able to receive a university education, if not a university degree, with the foundation of Girton and Newnham colleges at Cambridge in 1869 and 1871, and Lady Margaret Hall and Somerville College at Oxford in 1878 and 1879. In 1878, the University of London was the first to accept women on equal terms with men and to award degrees to female students. Students played rackets, fives, croquet, badminton, gymnastics and tennis. Girton had a gymnasium from 1877 and a tennis club the following year. Newnham was soon playing intercollegiate matches. Tennis, croquet and badminton were played at the two Oxford colleges. A decade later, there were inter-university competitions at the Scottish universities in hockey, tennis and golf. Graduates living in the city suburbs joined clubs for tennis and golf. These offered opportunities for mild flirtation as well as fun and exercise. Teaching was one of the few professions open to Victorian women, though the status was much lower than that for their male counterparts. And in the following decades, the new girls' public schools and high schools appointed young mistresses from the universities, many of whom had enjoyed sports. These Lady Blues carried their love of learning and enthusiasm for games with them and shared them with the next generation of girls. The girls' schools emulated much that was happening in the boys' schools, but in these first years they avoided imperial jingoism and athleticism did not become a cult. Sport was primarily used for health and moral education, but it was also associated with freedom and thus played its part in the push for women's progress in education and society. The girls' schools adopted a comprehensive physical education program well before the majority of games-mad boys' schools. Gymnastics, swimming and games were all on the curriculum. North London Collegiate School built a gymnasium in 1879, taught swimming in the 1880s, and acquired playing fields in 1885. Physical education and games at Cheltenham Ladies' College were taught solely by a team of specialist teachers, the start of a female tradition that was not to be rivaled by the men until the 1940s. Newly adapted or imported female-only games such as rounders, netball and lacrosse were adopted to avoid taints of masculinity. The 30-plus high schools of the Girls' Public Day School Company maintained this progress with a physical education specialist in every school and an overall inspector for the subject. Rodin insisted on 2 hours exercise in winter and 3 in summer. Hockey and cricket now joined the list of suitable activities. The Rodin headmistress was convinced of the moral value of team games. Considered merely as exercise and recreation, she wrote, other agencies might replace them, but considered as a means of training character, they stand alone, and they provide precisely that element in girls' education which has hitherto been lacking. Several schools took measurements of girls' height and weight to trace physical development and to assess health. Girls with incipient postural defects received a remedial treatment, the start of a therapeutic role for physical education, unheard of in most boys' schools. Charlotte Mason worked from the 1880s to spread the physical education message to teachers of younger boys and girls at preparatory schools, to those working in local education authority elementary schools, and, above all, through the network of home schools supported by the organisation she created, the Parents National Educational Union, the PNEU, and its teaching college at Ambleside in the Lake District. The physical education she advocated for under sevens was based on singing games and rhythmic dances for the youngest pupils, and on gymnastics for the oldest. Half an hour on alternate days was allocated for the work. Mason's methods were now widely adopted by teachers at preparatory and elementary schools, often without due credit, enabling many of England's youngest children to have access to a planned physical education. Physical training made steady progress in schools provided by or supported by the state in the wake of William Forster's Elementary Education Act of 1870. The introduction of military drill for boys, but not for girls, may have been for mixed motives, but a start had been made. The government wanted strong discipline. The schools welcomed the enhanced financial grant. We will meet that struggle again when we examine the national curriculum for PE. Girls got their turn in 1878 when schools administered by the London School Board adopted Swedish gymnastics, an initiative led by Martina Osterberg, Bergman Osterberg on her marriage, and gradually this system was approved for girls in most schools across Britain. The Cross Commission on Elementary Education of 1886 recommended that both military drill and Swedish gymnastics should be provided for all pupils up to the age of 11, but it also acknowledged that there was a shortage of qualified teachers. By 1893, physical training was officially recognised as a subject of instruction, and it was on the curriculum of all elementary schools. The government still wanted discipline, but it had broadened its aim to include instruction in personal hygiene, the development of sound posture, and the encouragement of good health. St Leonard's in Scotland introduced Swedish gymnastics, and Rodin appointed 3 graduates at what was to become the Bergman Osterberg Physical Training College, situated in Hampstead. This, the first of a string of women's colleges founded from the 1890s, espoused the Swedish tradition, while the rival Chelsea College, as it was later known, looked to Germany for its gymnastics. Together they created a new career path for girls from middle-class homes. Soon, girls in secondary schools, whether privately owned or supported by the state, were receiving a balanced physical education. Young women galore were studying at these new physical training colleges before moving on with missionary zeal to spread the ideas of the Scandinavian gymnast Per Henrik Ling, the practice of Swedish gymnastics, and their own love of games and dance. They were well received by headmistresses, girls and parents, and well provided with gymnasia, swimming pools, playing fields and more. Bergman-Osterberg's physical training college had moved from Hampstead to the open spaces of Dartford. One of her pupils, Rhoda Anstey, founded in Halesowen the college that later bore her name, then moved it to Birmingham. And Dorette Wilke, later Wilkie, a German immigrant, opened the Chelsea College in London. Soon there was an expansion of the system from 3 to 6. Irene Marsh founded her college in Liverpool. Another of Bergman-Osterberg's pupils, Margaret Stansfield, opened Bedford Physical Training College, and Flora Ogston, a pupil of Wilkie at Chelsea, was appointed the first principal of the Dunfermline College of Hygiene and Physical Training. There was a healthy rivalry between the colleges, and strong links developed between schools and colleges. A Dartford train headed department at a school would probably appoint Dartford train assistants. Bedford had a close association with the schools of the Girls' Public Day School Company. The Dartford College was never large, perhaps 20 students at any one time, but it was very successful. Madam's 2-year course, she was always known as Madam, comprised gymnastics, games, remedial work, physiology, anatomy and teaching skills, all conducted under strict discipline. How can you keep your children in order if you cannot keep your hair tidy? I have only 2 years in which to make a fine woman of you. Not a moment can be wasted. Despite high fees, competition for places was fierce. Madam created an evangelical profession. It was a national duty to banish the gym sergeant from state schools and the professors of calisthenics from girls' public schools and high schools. Let us at once and for all discard man as the physical trainer of woman, she told her students. She not only trained her teachers, but she also created a demand for them. Girton and Newnham at Cambridge made use of her expertise, as did the general teacher training colleges for elementary schools. The time was right. Women were taking to their bicycles and roller skates, adopting dress more suitable for exercise, and creating national championships for archery, golf and tennis. The only game that originated from Dartford was netball, an adaptation of the basketball demonstrated by an American visitor. Netball had special merit for enthusiasts of Swedish gymnastics over cricket and hockey, because it was not one-sided, both arms were used equally, and the body was not stooped. Former students of Dartford and the other colleges were prominent in the development of sport and dance for girls and women. Mary Hankinson in hockey, Edith Clark in lacrosse, Ethel Adair Impey with netball, and Jean Milligan for Scottish country dancing are just 4 examples. Hankinson was also the initiator of the first Association for Physical Education Teachers. In 1899, she brought together 30 former pupils of Bergman-Osterberg and formed the Association of Swedish Physical Educationists, soon to be renamed the Ling Association. Initially, membership was limited to Madam's girls and anyone trained at the Royal Central Gymnastic Institute in Stockholm, but gradually former students from the other 5 physical training colleges were admitted. Over the course of the next century, the Ling Association evolved to become the Physical Education Association, PEA, and then the Association for Physical Education, AFPE. The success of the women's colleges, and Dartford in particular, went beyond the education of girls and women. The Royal Navy adopted Swedish gymnastics, not least for its versatility on board ships and on land. When he left the Navy, Francis Grenfell took Swedish gymnastics to Eton. Reginald Roper, his colleague there, then brought it to Bedales, the first coeducational boarding school. Team games were now taking off in the girls' schools, led by the boarding schools of St Leonard's, Rodine and Wickham Abbey, and they were also spreading to the day schools. Games captains were choosing teams, arranging fixtures and awarding colours, all as in the boys' public schools. Games were seen to teach civic and patriotic values, as well as providing excellent exercise. How different from the crocodile walks of a generation or two earlier. Girls, wrote Dorothy Lawrence, headmistress at Rodine, must free themselves from the vices bred by a restricted life. Frances Dove, her equal at Wickham Abbey, saw games as a means of escaping a merely domestic life and entering the new professions. Games teach them almost all they will ever have the opportunity of acquiring of the power of working with others. It had been a struggle at first to explain all this to critics, especially fathers, almost a crusade, but a wave of change moved public opinion. By 1940, girls at the boarding public schools and the day high schools were getting a better deal than their brothers at the boys' schools. A well-rounded physical education and taught by specialist teachers. The boys' schools only began to catch up 20 years later, but that is another story. Despite the growing popularity of coeducation since the 1960s, boarding public schools and day high schools for girls still thrive. There are 141 girls-only schools currently in the Girls' Schools Association, the GSA. In a cultural divide from boys' schools and coeducational schools, it is invariably the case that all aspects of physical education are taught by specialist teachers. And these teachers' aims and outcomes for physical education are not exactly the same as those for their colleagues in boys' schools and coeducational schools. In a survey that was carried out in 2019 and published in TOSA, women teachers at 13 leading girls' schools were asked to rank the pupil benefits and teaching outcomes that they expected for physical education. Their order was enjoyment of participation, physical development and health, self-realization and self-confidence, perseverance and cooperation, stress release and mindfulness, skillfulness and coordination, social contacts and friendships, discipline and good behavior, and academic improvement. This order was similar for teachers at coeducational schools, where many of the teachers were women, with only minor adjustments in the order of the last 4 benefits. But there was a marked difference for the male teachers in boys' schools. Their top 5 were physical development and health, enjoyment of participation, perseverance and cooperation, self-realization and self-confidence, and skillfulness and coordination. Female teachers at girls' schools rate physical development and skill acquisition less highly than their male teachers do at boys' schools, and enjoyment and participation more. A matching survey on objectives for physical education saw the women at girls' schools produce this ranking: organic development and health, self-realization, emotional stability, motor skills, social competence, cognitive development, moral development, leisure, and aesthetic appreciation. Organic development and health also came top for the other 2 groups, but the second places were very different. Motor skills for coeducational schools, and self-realization and moral development for the men at the boys' schools. It would seem from this very limited survey that there is still a distinctive female tradition of physical education at work in Britain's independent schools, and that would surely please Madame and the other Victorian pioneers. Thank you for listening.